Before moving on, let's review the topic of imagery and embodiment. First, let's talk about Robert Desjardins' article, Healing Through Images, The Magical Flight and Healing Geography of Nepali Shamans. In it, he summarizes descriptions of the healing rituals of Nepali shamans made by different anthropologists over the years, and he concludes that the shamans utilize imagery about movement through a healing geography or an imaginary landscape to move the patient from an experience of sickness to one of wellness. The shamans, through chants and songs, describe a healing geography, which includes both actual places that are known to local Nepalese and also supernatural locations such as the underworld. The shamans describe themselves as magically moving through this landscape on a magical flight in order to diagnose the patient's problem. For example, the shaman may discover that the patient's illness was caused by the soul having been dragged into the waters of forgetfulness, or being trapped inside a castle, or having been attacked by an ancestor ghost at the crossroads, or being lost inside the jungle where many malevolent spirits dwell. Then the shaman describes himself moving through the imagined landscape to, for example, go up the inner mountain snowfields and receive a vision, or to call upon the goddesses of rocks, valleys, soils, and rivers to see if the soul has been trapped there, to find and rescue the lost soul, to release the soul from the fortress, to walk down the right mountain path, to climb the ladder through the 7 celestial realms, etc. Desjardins uses Tausig's term of imagician to refer to the fact that the shaman operates by conjuring images of a healing geography and moving the patient's focus from images of sickness to images of healing. In addition, the shaman sometimes uses symbolic objects and symbolic actions to mirror and thereby reinforce the imagery he is creating. For example, on pages 292 to 293, Desjardins notes that the shamans will sometimes construct their altars so that they resemble the imaginary world that the shaman is describing. The altar might include, for example, effigies that represent gods or spirits, or a ladder representing the various celestial realms that the shaman will ascend through the magical flight. As an example of symbolic actions used to reinforce the shaman's imagery, on page 300, he quotes another anthropologist's description of one ceremony. Quote, "The figure of a demon on horseback is made of dough and painted yellow to symbolize its evil nature. At night, the shaman's assistant puts the demon in a tiny boat on the river where it floats away. Meanwhile, the shaman sits in the house beating his drum, and he describes step by step the itinerary of the horse and its rider until it reaches Chongtutia Bridge, about 10 miles downriver. The evil has been eradicated." End quote. Desjardins concludes that the symbolic performance that parallels the shaman's description of a magical reality reinforces the feeling that the ritual is effectively moving the patient from sickness toward wellness. As he says on pages 300 to 301, quote, "It is this combination of physical performance and metaphorical movement through geographical space that makes the shaman's actions so efficacious." End quote. One sentence that summarizes the article as a whole is given on page 290. Quote, "The shaman transforms the experiential world of his patient by evoking, manipulating, and interpreting distinct geographical images in order to both represent experiences of illness and present novel ones of healing and health." End quote. While it might seem implausible that such a ceremony could improve a patient's sense of well-being, consider this quotation. Quote, "The cultural myth acted out by the shaman is the patient's reality. Any manipulation of the ritual narration changes this reality." End quote. Desjardins points out commonalities between the shaman's work and the psychotherapist's work, as psychotherapists are similarly called to diagnose the psychological landscape of the patient, using words such as traps, snares, and pitfalls, and to use metaphor and imagery to work through and beyond those obstacles. In the end, the Nepalese patient who believes in the shaman and believes that the shaman properly guided the patient through the healing geography will feel that he or she is on the road to recovery, metaphor intended. By way of contrast, we can consider Timothy Landry's article, Moving to Learn, Performance and Learning in Haitian Voodoo. Anthropological fieldwork, also called ethnography, traditionally entails what we call participant observation. Participant observation is a research method in which anthropologists immerse themselves in a community, participate in everyday and special activities, all the while observing and recording through writing notes, taking photographs and video, and audio recordings. As Landry points out, the methodology of participant observation has often privileged the visual way of knowing, focusing on what is seen and what is belief, with belief configured as an intellectual activity communicated with language. What ethnographers have been slower to pick up on are embodied ways of knowing. As Landry points out, this may be because of a deeper Western privileging of visualism and a view of culture as a set of beliefs held in the mind. However, Landry's views on culture changed as he was doing fieldwork with voodoo practitioners in Haiti. There, he perceived that embodied actions and embodied ways of knowing were perhaps even more central to their religious rituals than abstract beliefs. He underwent an apprenticeship with a voodoo priestess, and as part of his apprenticeship, he learned to properly dance in a spirit possession ceremony. In Haitian voodoo, the spirits, or loas, are central. A voodoo ceremony lasts for several hours throughout the night, in which practitioners dance and chant to the rhythm of the drums, which enjoin the spirits to attend. The goal is to induce the loas to enter the bodies of the dancers, what we often call spirit possession. Voodoo practitioners believe that a consequence of this spirit possession will be that the loas will bestow blessings on the dancers and their families. The experience of the ceremony is driven less by formalized belief, doctrine, and visual symbolism, and more by the embodied experience of the dancers and the spirit possession they seek. The entire body is poured into the dance, and the entire room is taken over by the sounds and vibrations of the drums, chants, and dancing feet. Finally, we can consider yoga as explored in the film Planet Yoga. In the film, we see that there are variations in yoga practice, and the film features different yoga instructors and gurus from Canada and India, and even a French religious historian. The disciplined movement of the body is obviously critical within the yoga experience. However, we can also discern the role of imagery. For one, the words used to describe the yoga practice themselves entail imagery. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, meaning unite, especially to unite body and mind, humanity, and cosmos. Consequently, practitioners may envision unity during their practice. Another important set of images in yoga is that of doors, gates, and paths. For example, in the film, the French religious scholar says, quote, "You're asked to walk step by step through this inner self, your progress through your body, through your mind, toward a certain form of liberation," end quote. She adds, quote, "It's a path to the self, absolutely, that runs through a series of doors linked to our inner barriers and our ignorance. There are always barriers and doors that open when you put in the effort," end quote. these images of opening doors provide a point of focus for yogis. What is more, we can see that imagery and embodiment are in fact coordinated in the practice of yoga. That is, the body is supposed to move in ways that mirror the images upon which the mind is focused. Take, for example, the notion of balance. Balance is important in yoga, and balance is both a mental image of an ideal and also part of the bodily experience of yoga, as many destabilizing poses require the practitioner to use their muscles to maintain physical balance. One of the Canadian instructors says, quote, "How am I supposed to live in my body in balance and harmony? We have to start with our own body." He says, "You know the carpenter's bubble, where they put the bubble in the middle? Well, think of that bubble point as what yoga's looking for. Breathe. And your mind changes because of the mind-body link. And yoga says that the link to the mind and the body is the breath. So postures and breathing help us to get comfortable in our body, get to the balance point." We also see how imagery and embodiment are coordinated, as many yoga poses refer to the shapes and movements that the body is supposed to take. For example, in the film, we see the sun salutation, in which the body goes through a set of movements that represent greeting the sun. As the yoga practitioner proceeds through these movements, they are simultaneously thinking about what it would look like to greet the sun. The mental image of greeting the sun and the embodied experience of greeting the sun are coordinated. In the film, we also saw the tree pose, cat pose, child's pose, and the lotus. In addition, in the film, we also see that the yoga instructors often utilize imagery to guide proper postures and breathing. For example, the first yoga instructor in the film says, quote, "Now with the tailbone into that space again, soften the heart towards the earth. Inhale and just lift the heart." End quote. Her words create mental pictures, softening the heart, lifting the heart, that guide people toward proper postures. Consequently, imagery and embodiment are coordinated throughout the yoga experience. To conclude, I'd like you to think about how these different ritual experiences might feel. One that centers imagery, one that stresses the physical experience, and one in which imagery and embodiment work in tandem.